In today's show, we discuss, is sex as rent criminal?
And now, the TNT Talk Show, daring to go where other podcasts fear to tread.
Hello, I'm Tony Fasula and I share the stage with my esteemed friend and colleague, Tayo Boya. Tayo, hello my friend once again. I hope you are keeping safe and well.
Yeah. What the hell, Tony? What are you going to do, eh?
I would love it one day where you actually more vibrant, more enthused, more excited than me. That would be good, wouldn't it?
Oh, my God. How are you feeling anyway?
No, I'm all right. I'm all
That's
right.
all right. That's good.
I've still got this blooming cough. I cannot get rid of it. Ex-COVID cough, and it's been well, it's over a week now.
It
since I
took me
was-
weeks to get rid of it. Weeks.
Really?
Mm.
Do you know what? The first time I had COVID, which was obviously quite a while ago now, I don't remember having a cough like this. This is more lingering already.
Mm.
And but hey, anyway, enough of that. Let's move on with the show. Come on, I've got to ask our tradition. You know, I'm going to ask you to say hi to our audience.
Okay. I'll say hi to the audience. Hello, audience.
Uh-oh. That was too eager.
Well, you know what comes next? No, I decided to mix it up this week, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I am not quite as vicious as even I think that I am. I don't like seeing you suffer, and over this COVID thing you've had, I felt maybe I've got to let you recover and be fully ready again before I hit you. So this time, instead of one of those kind of jokes, I'm just going to share a little piece of myself with you and the audience.
Okay.
Yep. So it's just
I'm
like
suspicious. Go on. Okay.
When I die, I just want to die like my great uncle Thomas. He was a wonderful person, and he died peacefully in his sleep. I don't want to die screaming like the passengers in his car.
For God's sake. Oh my God. That's terrible. Why am I laughing? That's terrible. Oh my God. That's terrible. That's terrible. Oh my God. Why am I laughing? Oh. I'm going to apologize to our audience now already. Sorry about that. Let's swiftly move on. In today's show, we are discussing, well, it's been in the news of late, actually, but the topic is sex as rent actually criminal? And Taya, you came up with this one, so do you want to kick things off for us?
I was surprised to come across a video in which this was being discussed, actually, and I had no idea that it could be illegal. I mean, I don't really see how it can be illegal because I suppose in my naivete, I feel that sex as rent can only be consensual to a certain degree. I mean, I don't see how it can't, rape obviously is illegal. And if it isn't rape, then it's consensual. And if it's consensual, what's the problem? And I think what sparked my interest was that the case that I was watching, the case that was being discussed on a useless tube, I call it not YouTube, I call it useless tube channel, didn't even argue that there was coercion. No one was arguing there was coercion. It was a woman who told her friend and the friend thought that it was off. The woman herself wasn't complaining. She was just telling her friend, "Oh, this is how I pay for my nice apartment." The friend was offended on her behalf, and that's what sparked the case. It wasn't a woman. Woman wasn't the actual woman. Tenant didn't feel anything, and I think they both got into trouble. And I found that remarkable. That
she got into trouble as well.
Well, I think so. I mean, I haven't kept up with the case. I suppose I can find it on Useless before I look for it, but yeah. So that was what I just felt it's really weird that in this laissez-faire society we've built, there are still these little pockets where people can feel offended for others, and it matters.
I think it's to do with the fact that the person is, I mean, there's no, if you think about it, is there a payment involved? Or, okay, there's no physical money passing hands, but I dare say that if someone was offering their place for rent and someone came to them and said, "Look, I'm a bit short of money. Can I pay you in kind?" You know what that means. Now, why, and I agree with you, why would that be illegal? Because it's two consenting adults. If he agrees and says, "I'm happy to forego the rent this month," then, for a little bit of hanky-panky, fine. I think the problem with the whole piece at the moment with this, which is in the news, is the fact there's exploitation involved. You're offering this to people who are sort of vulnerable. Now, granted, they can still choose yes or no, but they feel pressured sometimes into accepting. And I think it's more those cases individually than the whole thing, because how would you police this? I mean, because if someone was saying, I'm happy to go with this, it depends on the agreement. Think about this. Let's say a landlord, I don't know, this says this and advertises this, because apparently they're advertising on the internet. Yeah, broad daylight. But someone says, rent lowered for, I don't know, fun. If you offer fun, you get lower rent. Now, that fun, in quotes, is up to the person who's taking up the property, surely. They're not mandated. They don't have to do the act. It's, do they want reduced rent? Then they can get a bit of hanky-panky with the landlord and reduce their payments. Now, is that manipulation? Is it taking somebody who's vulnerable and taking advantage of them?
Well, I've got a question for you. Let's say the tenant, and I'm very interested in that you assume that the landlord is male and the tenant is female.
There's cases of male.
Sorry?
There's cases of male.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if there were cases of female.
There
nowadays.
are female and men as well.
Exactly. They're very good-looking men, and
No, not even that. There's some older ladies I've had a look at who have got places to sell. They've become widowed and are offering a similar service.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. So it's both ways. It's not one single sex.
No, I wasn't the one that was assuming that, because you only used the male gender, the male pronoun for the landlord.
It's because the disproportionately landlords tend to be male. Disproportionately, there are more male landlords than there are female for some reason.
But in order to keep our minds open, we shouldn't really sort of.
No, indeed, it wasn't meant to be gender specific. It was a landlord asking a tenant for. That's
better language than, let's say, he and her. I don't want he and her. Just a tenant, a landlord pressurizing a tenant. Now, what if the tenant is a prostitute, earns their money by being paid for sex, and then that tenant pays the landlord in that money, with the money earned from prostitution? Nobody's going to argue about that. So all we've had is just a
prostitution's
transaction.
not legal either, though, is
Sorry?
it? Really, prostitution isn't technically legal
I don't know what the situation is. I mean, in the UK, I believe soliciting is illegal. And I was going to wait until later in the show to say, I think it is the act of asking for sexual favors in return for something of value, which in this case is tenancy.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem, because that's soliciting.
Yes.
Right? But as usual, a lot of my sort of thinking and thinking and exposure to these ideas comes from the United States, where I think there are many states where prostitution is not illegal.
Yeah.
You've got Arizona, is it, that has got brothels, and Louisiana.
I think they all have.
Well, they all have. I mean, legal though. Are they legal?
Well, legal.
But I think they have the legal bordellos and things. I'm pretty sure in Arizona.
I don't even think it was legal. I think it's just that the authorities take a blind eye. Do they? I wasn't.
Well, it's important for the purposes of this show. It's important that it should be legal, because if it's legal, then you got to ask yourself, what is the problem with sex for rent? If it's illegal, then you're looking to prostitution, and then you got to ask, is this not prostitution?
But you're not actually exchanging money, are you?
Yeah, but you're exchanging something of value for money.
You are.
Yeah.
But it's not a transaction that's gone ahead, is it really?
It is a transaction, because instead of, there's value to it. For instance, if a person's rent is £300 a month, and it's been reduced to £150 a month with, 1 night per week set aside for hanky-panky, then basically you're paying 150 divided by 4, whatever that is, just under £40 a week for hanky-panky, aren't you? So that's
can't even say sex. We say hanky-panky.
Sorry. When I closed my eyes and I was thinking about it, I thought to myself, well, we're going to have to mark this episode as an adult episode, so I might as well just say, But hey, hang on. You're saying sex because that's where your filthy mind has gone. What if it has just been pleasured by anal beads? We're going
to have to mark this as an adult show now. You've said that. But yeah, it's.
See? It could be anything. It
could be anything. Any
smacked
situation.
On your naked
exactly.
buttocks with a slice of lemon,
I don't know where your mind is going with this.
Whenever I say that, people go, eh?
So you've said it before.
I've said it before. I funnily enough, I said it to a landlady of mine many years ago, and she was.
What did she offer you?
No. We were talking. I don't know. We were talking about something or other. But I was sitting at the kitchen table, and I said something like, it's like having your butter smacked with a slice of lemon. And she was, eh? couldn't process it. Why would anyone find what all that? We had a good laugh about it, and I've enjoyed using that imagery ever since. It seems to stop most people in their tracks.
Yeah.
No, I'm that's just deviancy, isn't it? And that's the thing. That's the point.
Yeah.
That there are levels where we start off thinking that's maybe dodgy, and then as it gets more and more deviant, we get into territory where we say, okay, that's not okay at all, whatsoever.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, we are the ones that are being uncomfortable. And if the two parties involved are consensual and happy, what's it got to do with us?
I think it's this the fact that society. I know, but if you think about society is geared up to protect the vulnerable and those that are being manipulated by somebody else in whatever form that takes. And this is one example where there is an element of manipulation, because unlike a traditional, let's say you're going to rent a property, the landlord will have to give you a contract. And normally the contract's got the fine details in. It's a legally binding document that the tenant has to abide by, and the landlord sets out the criteria of the rental. So that's something they can both see, they both agree to and sign. But when you're offering extras like this, which is a bit murky, it's grey, I dare say he or she who's bringing up the contract isn't going to put that in print. Then you got opportunity for scope creep. I mean, let's say it was a nudge and a wink conversation where it was agreed between both parties that, look, if we get it on once a week, I'll give you a bit of a discount, blah, blah, blah. And then while the tenant is now in the property, the landlord, rather than once a week, is there 3 or 4 times a week, and putting pressure on the tenant, because none of this was legal, was formally legalized in an agreement. It's it's liable for what's the word I'm looking for?
Abuse.
For abuse, yes, that's the perfect word.
And
that's the problem. And so, although by law, I think it's a grey area. It's still a grey area, because there's no law that actually says this is against the law. There isn't one. There are others that are around the edges, and if you were to take someone to court, you'd have to take them based on one of the other current laws in order to try the individual. But as you rightly say, if it was 2 consensual adults and they're doing each other a favor, then it's not against the law, is it?
No. What is interesting is, if we amend the law, it could become contractual, and that will protect the tenant and the landlord. Because currently, though you're thinking about one way of coercion, you're not thinking about devious tenants. A devious tenant who might seduce.
There are devious landlords.
Sorry?
There are more devious tenants than there are devious landlords.
Well, you see, the thing is, I can foresee a situation where a devious tenant involves the landlord in something smutty like this, and then holds it against him or her.
Yeah.
Once having gotten that initial boundary crossed, who's actually manipulating who? It's all, like you said, it's the precise word to use here is murky. It all gets very murky and very uncertain, and that could be the fault of our mores and the law, rather than the actual situation itself. I mean, if we were to legalize prostitution, which I believe we've discussed before on this show, and I'm all in favor of the legalization of prostitution, as you know. I think it's a very good thing for society. And if we did that, we could then allow people to have these landlord-tenant relationship all contracted, all in a contract. And that would protect, because if the idea is to protect the vulnerable, that would be a start. The other thing that you'd need then is to ensure that people are never so financially distraught that they have to go into prostitution, or they have to have this avenue, to take this avenue in order to pay the rent. Which, we seem to know how to protect errant bankers who have done something that has cost millions or billions, but we don't seem to know how to protect poor people.
Yeah.
And we need to have a complete rethink about how how our society is structured.
Although there is this, I mean, we can't really discuss it today, but there's something we wanted to discuss about a universal income, which would get rid of a lot of these problems, because people could then afford or have money to pay for premises and things like that without the concern of of, having to die, having to go to prostitution and the like in order to earn an income to live even. So that's a separate topic for another time. But the point here is it against the law? Because there's a number of politicians of late who are, jumping on the bandwagon. I don't know whether they feel that exploitation is happening to a big degree and they want to put their stamp on it as the champion for it. But because there's a lot of examples of it actually in place where you can go on the internet. I think you've just rightly said it earlier, and you can actually search for this to get discounted properties if you're willing to, have a bit of sex in return. You're giving something of yourself, so your rent will be less. But if it's not in a contract, then there's more argument of the fact that the landlord could change his mind, or while this process is going on, they could get fed up and go, right, okay, sorry, your rent's going back up because I don't want this anymore. Or the tenant is not well, or can't do what the landlord asked for. What's the landlord going to do now? Put the rent back up? Do you see what I mean? There's all these grey areas that could complicate the whole situation. And you're right, if prostitution is legalized, where it becomes clean and taxed and looked after, and the people who perform the acts are protected, then it'd be easier for landlords to put this sort of favors in the small print of their contracts. So the choice is up to the tenant if they want to save money and act on what the recommendations are in the lease, or whatever it may be, or whatever the rental agreement. Sorry.
Well, yeah, that is one thing. Then the other thing you have to think about is, if this is legalized, just how widespread would this become? Would you be able to find properties where you don't have to give of yourself? Because every landlord would just stick it in there on the off chance that they get a good-looking tenant.
Or would they word it as such that it's up to them to choose whether the tenant can be offered this service or not? Because it wouldn't be mandated, would it? It wouldn't have it every single tenant. It would be those tenants that they feel.
They won't give you. They just won't lease their property to you. So if you've tried 5-10 houses and or flats or whatever, and you're getting kind of desperate, and someone says, everywhere you go, it's always like, but don't forget this, you're like, I don't want that. I just want to pay the rent. And in Northampton, sorry, baby, it's all this way. He's like, so that could get out of hand very quickly.
Also, if this is, imagine where this could go if this starts to be put into law as well. If they were to put a law in to ban it, how would it be enforced? I don't.
Well, someone then what you're doing is you're giving a lot of power to the tenant, because the tenant could just make an accusation. Even now, it's so. We in the UK, we're not quite where Canada is, but in Canada, I believe that, my manosphere, my male, what do you call it now? What would you call it? Male social, male protection, male advocacy. That's the word. The male advocacy groups to which I belong. My understanding is that actually having sex in Canada is really dangerous, because all sorts of terrible things could happen. There's a chap called Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And I believe that he has complained that we've gotten to the point now where, first of all, it was getting consent from the woman, or obviously getting sort of very specific verbal consent before having sex with a woman. Then that was tested in court and that failed.
Why did that fail?
Yes, sorry?
Why did that fail?
Probably inebriation. She was inebriated, or post-coital regret, which is something that people have. They say, well, it was a social situation where I felt pressured.
Oh.
So the next thing was, okay, written consent.
What?
Written consent. You actually have a contract in your pocket when you go out to the nightclubs, and you ask the lady to sign, and she signs, and then you can have sex. And that failed.
Why did that fail?
Once
There's no
again,
accountability here.
well, once again, we boil down to, pressure. She felt pressure. She'd had a drink or whatever. And the idea was, well, you really have to wait until people are sobered up in the morning and things like
What?
that. It's like, yeah, but the moment is gone. Well, maybe they're saying that's the point or something. And anyway, that failed. And then it came down to a video consent.
Video consent.
And you know what I'm going to say next?
Go on.
Even that failed.
What?
Even video consent failed. Essentially, the argument that Jordan Peterson and there's this woman I can't remember her name in a million years. She is not Lauren Southern. There's a Lauren Southern, but I don't think it was Lauren Southern. Someone like Lauren Southern, who is a female advocate who's a female supporter of male advocacy.
Okay.
Even she and this woman I'm thinking about is a professor of something or the other in a Canadian university. She and Jordan Peterson were saying what this has essentially done is remove the ability of women to give consent. So it's and there's a nice word for it. It's made women into children. It's taken away the adulthood, because an adult can give consent. Yeah. But if you say that a woman's consent is always meaningless, what you're saying is that she's immature. She cannot give consent. So it's not safe for men to have sexual relations in case there's this post-coital regret.
That's insane.
That's Canada. I think Canada is the most out there example of this. So if you started trying this sex for rent thing, you can imagine where that would go. That could get really messy.
Really so messy. Is the easy option then to make it unlawful? That's
the easy option. Just look, you know what? Just like we say for schools, like a university professor, a university professor is obviously an adult. In university, you'd expect everybody to be over 18, and they're adults too, legally. Just the same, for the avoidance of doubt, don't have anything to do with your student.
So that's actually an easy fix. So really, if you have a tenant, then you can't have any sexual.
Nope.
So there is mileage in this in order to nip it in the bud. If they do something as simple as that, I mean, I think that's a great idea, Tayo. I mean, the fact that they then stipulate that cannot happen. If
I don't think you go far enough, Tony. I don't think you go far enough. I don't think you know where I'm going with all this.
Go on.
I think we should just outright ban sex. Why are you laughing? I'm serious.
What do you mean? What, you want everyone to get married?
I want people to have licenses to have sex. You need a license.
You need a license to have sex.
Then there's no argy-bargy, hanky-panky. There's no post-coital regret. There's nothing like this. You go to court. You make your application. The court looks at you and says, "What's all this about? What happens if there's a kid?
Consent to have sex?
Who looks after the kid? Blah blah blah. Have you got HIV? Are you safe? Yada yada." You ask all the questions. You tick all the boxes. If the court thinks, "Yeah, okay," then you can go and have sex. If not, stocks, 20. 2 days in the stocks. 20 lashes of the king. And when I say lashes of the king, I'm not talking about the king. Have you ever heard somebody who knows how to crack a whip? Have you ever heard it? And can you imagine how much it will hurt?
Oh, it's unbearable.
It takes strips of flesh off. So, you lash a couple of people in public. Everybody gets the picture. Look, we're serious.
You're describing a dystopian sort of society.
Well, actually, I don't know. Then people begin to value sex. And they value relationships. And by the way, this is sex. By sex, we have to declare sex as what? It can't just be, cuddling and a really hot fumble. We're talking about penetrative sex here, right? One or any of the orifices fully or partially penetrated, that constitutes sex. Anything else, yeah. So as long as you don't penetrate any orifice, you're
You're
fine.
okay.
You're fine. And I think,
Interesting.
yeah, see?
It's an interesting idea, and it's thinking out the box for sure. How it would be policed, I don't know.
Well, be policed by somebody by somebody like owning up. Like if you have a baby, it instantly becomes, where did that come from? Where's your license for sex?
But you're talking. This is fascism at the nth degree. I mean,
It
you've
is.
got state controlling the population in every facet here. We can't even do the basics. So
You can do
are you?
everything else except what I've said.
Well, no, you could actually. You could, because if you get your license,
No,
you
not a
then.
license. Without the license, you can do hot fumbling. I mean, there's such a thing called mutual masturbation. That won't be falling under license anything. There's no penetration of any orifice.
Hmm. I don't
So,
know. I mean, there's still some grey areas here. I mean, okay, this sounds interesting in principle, but
mhm.
I'm sorry, in a free society, it just doesn't happen. I know you described what's happened in Canada to a degree, and it sounds ludicrous what they're going through. But are they not edge cases here? I mean, is that's what's made in
It
the
comes down to
headlines?
this. If you have a son that's going to university, you would pound into his head that he must not, under any circumstances, take a girl home from the club after she's had a drink. Under any circumstances. You've got to meet her in the morning for a coffee and then date her and just be very, very, very careful over a period of time because in some cases, not some cases, ooh, there's a decree or statute or some kind of thing in universities, this time in America, and audience members are free to look it up. And I think the search term would be something like um, the right to defend yourself against sexual accusation in university. And there is no right of that any longer. If you are accused of sexual misdemeanor in American university, you're just assumed to be guilty.
Isn't that rather harsh?
It's not just harsh, it actually goes against the grain of our common law, which is innocent until proven guilty. But people that have been thrown out of university based on
An accusation
an
rather than
accusation.
any
And
facts.
where I read about where I watched this thing about this the sex for rent, it was actually on a useless tube channel where the lawyers, two men and one woman, that's what they do. They help they help men who've been accused like this try to get them back
Cleared.
into
Yeah.
to prove their case actually because they're not usually allowed to say anything.
Interesting. So, so these sexual favors, let's get back onto the topic itself. Sexual favors offered by landlords. I mean,
Offered by tenants.
sexual
Asked
favors
by
asked
demanded,
by
maybe asked or
landlords
demanded.
and offered by tenants. But could it be, where does it happen where it's offered the other way? Because you could have tenants,
Yeah, exactly.
so that's why it's a grey area. How on earth you now, how we police this, how we manage this, how we can stop this happening or put some boundaries around it to contain it or put some rules or legislation that keeps it boxed in somehow. This is a massive can of worms because we've tried to do it with prostitution for millennia and we failed. This is just another It's not prostitution. It's another spin. It's favors. It's sexual favors in return for some benefit. But it could work in many ways. You have a sugar daddy and gets a younger girl, and she's willing to do this because she knows the sugar daddy is gonna throw lavish gifts on her in that example. And it works the other way around, where you've got a older female cougar, that's the name they're associated with, who's after a younger man, and the same applies. So so that is situation, there's sexual favors going on in return for items of value. But why is that allowed?
I think you touched on it, and I like how you put it, and I think maybe that's the beginning of a solution. That in these situations, either party can offer sexual favors in return for something or the other, but neither party can demand.
Okay.
If we go down that route and we enhance that route, I think that should solve people's problems. That either party can offer it. Say, look, I noticed
it's in the contract. If you wish to take it, there are some benefits for you. You get discounts, you get blah, 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 but you don't have to sign that bit. You
Precisely.
can cross that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that prevents people from finding out that there are no rentals in Northampton, where because everywhere you go, someone's going to want to put something into you. So it's just like, let's move out and move to Milton Keynes, where you find that they want to use anal beads, and you go, I hate this Milton Keynes people, man.
You're starting to worry me with this. You brought it up on a number of occasions.
It's the idea. It's the idea of who was the first lunatic to come up with sticking beads in their head? What's the matter with you? How do you think? What about that guy that was found the hamster up there?
Oh, don't.
The poor hamster.
The hospital.
What the hell are you doing?
The hospital has stories on things like this.
Really?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No. Okay. Odd things.
Odd things.
Well,
but people are odd. But people are odd. People are odd. People are craving these kinks, and people are kinky in certain situations, and
it's nice when they find somebody who can accommodate them.
Well, absolutely, and
that's why, they're consensual, and that's okay.
Well, this is the same with this
to a certain degree. Who was the name of the guy? Was it in Germany who ate the other guy or something?
Was
it Germany or Belgium? Because those people in Belgium, they're just. There's the guy who locked up his daughter for yonks in the cellar, built an entire blooming apartment and whatnot. And then there's this other guy.
As a sex slave, though.
Sorry?
20 years, sex slave for 20. His own daughter.
His own. I mean, what?
But these thankfully are edge cases. That's the thing. But they're horrible.
Edge. That's way out there, man. Never mind edge.
That's what's the edge cases.
Edge of the universe. That one.
Yeah.
But the one who, I think it was Germany, I don't think it was Belgium, the guy who put out an advert, he wanted to eat someone, so they met for dinner. The guy spoke into a camera, committed, drank whatever. No, they cut off his leg first, I think.
What?
And then they ate the leg, and then he drank something, died, and then the guy cut the rest of him up. But I don't know, it all went. I don't know how the police found out and got involved. Yeah, not so.
That is just insane. I mean, but then again, you've got some really sick people, and there's a lot of weird perversions. But
yeah, and the thing about it that concerns me is that it was entirely consensual. But it was still against the law, because cannibalism is against the law.
Well, yeah.
And I don't think they could have gotten the guy on murder, because it was suicide. The guy said, he spoke into the camera and drank the concoction. So maybe you could get him on assisted suicide, maybe. But even then. So it's not so much. Sometimes these cases are not straightforward.
No.
Are not straightforward. But if you just try to keep it very simple, is it an offer or a demand? I think that cuts out quite a lot of.
Yeah, but then how do you, again, you see, this is the problem where the authorities will have is how do you create laws that catch all these nuances? Because there are so many variations that can fall through the cracks of the law. And then, to enforce it, you're going to need someone to then later on complain and then
Yeah, things
somehow.
like this. I want to go back to Parliament. I don't trust the courts any longer because we have activist judges. And these activist judges, there was a time when people were afraid of crossing of breaking the law. Then we got all these liberal, bleeding heart judges, and now people, especially the rich. I was reading a horrendous case, truly horrendous case, where in 2019, a drunken teenager entitled to drive a car. He was entitled to drive, but he was drunk and he killed 4 people.
What?
This is in America. He killed 4 people, and he got off with 6 months suspended
Sentence.
suspended sentence because his parents were filthy rich, and the lawyers argued that because of his privileges since birth, he was constitutionally unable to understand the ramifications of his actions, and that's what got him off.
That's incredible, and that's stupid. He's still, I mean, okay, we digressed a little here, but this particular chap you're describing was still driving a car, and there's laws for that. So if you don't drive a car with care and attention, you're responsible. See, the art of responsibility seems to be shifted out of society. No one is allowed to be responsible for themselves, even if they want to. It's bizarre. It seems to be that the state has to be responsible for the individual, whereas, in the past, the individual was responsible for themselves. We're in a free society. We should be responsible for ourselves. Granted, there are laws to protect the vulnerable who can be exploited, and I suppose this topic is touching on that. But you still, to rent a place, you've got to be at least able to understand what you're doing because you're being given shelter to live. So you have to, I'm assuming you've got to pay something. So you know about money, you know about the transaction. So if the landlord offers the tenant, oh, by the way, if you're struggling with payment, here there's some, if you want to, provide some sexual favors, I can help you out rent wise. I can lower
What about
the
if
rent.
it's a surprise? Provide sexual favors to my friends.
Well, this is the thing. This is where the small print has to cover
Yeah,
it.
or to people that actually what we've suddenly got a pimp situation where people are pimping tenants.
Yeah, this is where the problem lies, and
So
this is why
no third parties involved. It has to be one of the laws.
Indeed, it would have to be. But then again, what if the landlord is a couple?
Well, there we go.
And the small print means sexual favors, and the tenant agrees and finds out after that it's actually not for one. It's for the other.
The parties have to be stipulated then.
Well, see what I mean? Now the contract gets bigger and bigger and bigger and more multi-paged just for that bit. So I liked your original proposal, which was like you gave example of a professor and a university and a student. They just cannot get together, and the same would apply.
Nobody cares. We don't care whether it's consensual. Yada blah blah blah.
You can't.
Someone's got to move out.
Yeah, before you can start a relationship. So yeah, I think that is a sensible alternative. It actually makes sense, and that closes that loophole. So there can't be any favors. But then again, landlords will now put rent up. So there's going to be a lot of people who may be happy with this current arrangement, and now they could be ending up on the street because they now can't afford the actual rent. They were happy with the deal that they had with their landlord, that they could offer sexual services in exchange for lower rent. And now this law's been introduced and they're turfed out on the street because the landlord, unfortunately, is going to put the rent up because he's getting nothing else in return. So
Yeah,
that
but
could
market
also cause
forces,
a
though,
problem.
market forces, we have to trust market forces, and we have to trust that in that situation, he or she will have an empty apartment, and eventually they'll be forced to lower the rent.
But in the meantime, that tenant is out.
Well, in the meantime, that tenant has to find somewhere in a lower class area,
Oof,
where that fits their.
dangerous, whatever. Yeah. You
Well,
see,
that's what fits their pocket, isn't it? I mean,
well,
in our society,
this is where
it's market forces, isn't it?
this is where this could fall into the category of exploitation, because you've now put in people over a barrel in terms of they can't afford, there's no affordable housing.
They can't always do that, Tony. You can't always say this is exploitation, this is exploitation. At some point in time, well, you were the one that was saying that we have to take responsibility for our
I do, I
situations, right?
do, I do. I
No, you
totally
don't.
think that.
What if we don't make it about sex? What if we make it about free labor? Or rather, labor, not free. Say, well, okay, you can't afford to pay me, but I need my restaurant swept. I need someone to behind the bar. So you come and work hours for me. You're going back into serfdom. You're going back into serfdom. And it's a short hop from serfdom into slavery.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't do that. I mean, we're just, here's money and there's the room. That's it.
Yeah. So we do have to make it illegal then.
I've come around in talking about it. I've come around to the point of view where, it's got to be illegal.
Yeah. But I do like your idea where you said
No, it's
where
no
you
sex
likened
unless
it.
it's licensed. Yeah.
Well, no, not that one particularly.
Nobody seems to like that idea.
I
Especially
mean,
young people. They think that idea sucks, man.
fascism. But think about it. This rule of law where you'd have to put it in a contract if you wanted to, or get a legal, get legalized
Get
a
permission from the court.
license.
From the court.
Imagine you'd get situations, you could think the leap isn't too big. You'd get married couples wanting this. Say, well, I want in my contract.
No.
Why?
Part of getting married is an automatic grant of the license.
But think about this. Wouldn't there be stipulations of we must have at least sex once a week minimum?
No,
See what I mean?
no, nobody cares. Once you're
Nobody
married,
cares. Once
you're married, it's part of it. You're legal. That's it. Your sex between you is legalized.
Okay. That's interesting. So there's no addendum to that to say once you're married, I would want sex at least once a
No,
week.
there's nothing like that because the court isn't interested in any of that. It's just there's your license. It's part and parcel of getting married.
But we have that now.
Yeah.
But then could there not be cases, as there are now, where once you're married, there's been some cases where one of the party have turned violent and force the partner, the wife, husband, whoever it is, to engage in sex when they don't want to?
So I'm of the old school where I'm not at all. I'm of the old school. I don't believe that it can be rape in marriage, but what there can be in marriage is violence, right? Domestic violence. So although I don't believe there can be rape in marriage, I do believe that there can be domestic violence in marriage. So if there's domestic violence in marriage, we've got laws to handle that. But you can't just call it rape. It's not being forced to have sex. It's the violence that was practiced in order to have the sex. That's illegal.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Well, I don't know what else to add here because I think we've really covered this topic and actually come up with a good solution. So the MPs,
for once,
yeah.
So it took 150 episodes.
So the MPs are actually quite right in trying to make this illegal, but I think they're taking a different stance. They're not doing it for necessarily the vulnerability of the client or the tenant, I think they're doing it because they don't want landlords to exploit their tenants. But your rule, where, I mean, again, how could you enforce it? I think it's a great idea, where the landlord and the tenant cannot have a relationship unless.
How you enforce it is if you find out, maybe that's. Do you know when we started and you asked me why did the tenant, why was she the tenant who told her friend, and then the friend blew the whistle, and then they both got into trouble.
Yeah,
maybe
why
that's
did they both
why.
get into trouble?
Sorry?
I don't understand why they both got into trouble.
Well, you've just said so. That how do you enforce it? You enforce it that if we find out, both parties are in trouble because both parties committed the crime.
But there's been situations where tenants have got together with landlords and formed a relationship and got married.
If we made the law, so what happens, just like a university professor and a student, they can't be in the relationship. So somebody's got to move, or the students has got to finish uni, right? And then having finished uni, they can have that relationship. So that would raise eyebrows, but nothing has been broken. No law has been broken.
What about if a landlord chose to say, if they were being investigated, saying, I don't charge my tenant any fee anyway? Then nothing's been broken.
I don't charge my
tenant anything anyway. It's a room which they happen to live in. I'm not charging them anything.
So in that case, you're not the landlord.
No, you're not the landlord.
She's a guest.
But then again, she's a guest, and the guest can do what she likes with the person she's being a guest with. Yeah, he's just allowing her to stay in the house. But again, could there not be sexual favors with that request? Say, well, I don't charge you any rent. I'll just let you stay. If you want to give me sexual favors because you're grateful, so be it. See, no money, no transactions are happening here. It's purely a relationship where I've put you up as a sugar daddy almost. I've put you up in a property, and it's up to you if you want to thank me for that with occasional sexual favors. I'm not demanding.
Yeah, but I don't see that's not anything we're talking about. There's no contract or anything there.
But there's no contract now, is there? There's no contract now.
That's actually friends with benefits, if you like.
Yes, but
so there's nothing there for the law to get involved with.
Well, the same with someone who's a tenant.
No, a tenant has got a contract. There's a contract here. Okay, it's meant to be a contract based on fiat currency for living space and its degree of privacy. So there's a contract, and so there's this. I think in law, is it called TORT? Is it called tort? Where you got this thing about contract. There's business between the two parties.
I don't know that term. I'm not familiar with that.
Well, yeah, I think it's something to do like, I think the law of torts is like the law of business. There's a business relationship. It's not a couple of friends just yakking.
Right.
And that's why it's under the law. So there's a whole body of law. I hope no lawyers are laughing at me and saying that's not what tort means, but I think that's what it means.
Okay.
So if you're not, if you're just a friend living in this person's apartment and occasionally you guys have sex, that's just nobody's flipping business. That's just not, it's not, unless there's rape, it's actually not under any observation by law. For what?
Yeah. Okay. So because there's an agreement in place, a rental agreement of some sort, where you've got a tenant in reality having to partake in giving some benefit to a landlord, if that payment or the fee is somehow reduced because of sexual favors, then that is now excuse me, illegal as what we should do. Okay, and it's to do with a new law which would be landlord-tenant relationship. None. They cannot engage in any. So it must be a directive from the government and a law that says this. I'm still thinking that there's ways around this.
I think there is something in a university where both parties can go to the academic council and say they're interested in one another.
But they have to do it
And
together.
sorry,
They have to do it together.
well, not hand in hand together, but they have to contact the council and say, "I like the professor," and then the professor says, "Yes, I like this student." And then what happens after that is that the students' papers and exams are not marked by that professor.
Okay. So it's not frowned upon.
It's frowned. Well, so I think it's frowned upon. I mean, it's not. They don't love it, but they'll
Tolerate.
they'll tolerate it. They'll tolerate it. I mean, if you go out all out and you put it on paper and say, "I like this student," I suppose the point being you couldn't really come up with it on your own because no professor will go and write down and say, "I like this student," without having some reasonable idea that the student likes
them
back.
But
So
then
there's obviously
normally-
been some kind of thing
Yeah.
going on, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's what it'd be like, But since you've come out in black and white and it's all above board now,
as long as there's no age issues, which
Well,
we're
what's
talking
age got to
adult.
do with it?
we've got-
I remember-
No, we're talking adults.
years
here,
ago, years and
consensus.
years, donkeys years ago, I was watching a film. Before we even knew the word pedophilia in society, I was watching a film. This has been back in maybe in the 70s, maybe. I was watching this film with Frank Sinatra and Audrey Hepburn.
Right.
And Audrey Hepburn, they fell in love, that kind of thing. It was kind of, I think it was a rom-com. I think it was just a romance kind of thing. And even at that time, that looked really odd because he was much, much older than she was. And I was like, so can you imagine that even way before we started thinking about the age thing, I could sense that it was inappropriate, that no, this guy is too old. He's too old for her. And since then, we've had that, I don't know if it was a millionaire or a billionaire, marry that very attractive young woman who was in the who was in the what's it called now? Not Smoking Gun. What's it called? Naked Gun series. You remember she was in the third?
Yeah.
Do you remember her?
She died, didn't she?
She died.
Yes.
She died. Do you remember
But he
her
was
name?
90 and she was like 30.
But no, it was like 70, I think.
Oh, 70,
They were
but he-
together for maybe 15, 20 years before he died.
Okay.
And that was consensual. It was, and she did. The funny thing about it is that when he left her his money and the family was all up in arms about it, it came out in court that she was really fond of him. Amazing. You think, why? But that's how human beings are. So if the student is genuinely attracted to her, why am I saying her? You see? Even I fell into that sexist thing.
Okay.
If the student is genuinely attracted to their professor, what's he got to do with the rest of us? As long as that student is an adult.
But there we go. There has to be some boundaries, and
so that there's no. You said it, didn't you say? So it's to protect the vulnerable.
Yeah.
You don't want, which I've seen in Nigeria, but which is horrific. You don't want a situation where the professor is pestering the student. That is what we're all trying to stop. And we don't want landlords pestering tenants.
Yes.
That is what we're trying to stop. So if we think about what we're trying to stop and we stick to what we're trying to stop, I think we'll be fine as a society. And that's maybe what the parliamentarians are trying to do. Is like no pestering, saying no coercion.
Yeah.
I said it. Make an offer, don't make a demand.
But you actually want to take that off the table now. You want to
after this discussion we've had today. I think.
it a step
Do you know
further.
what? Let's just not even go there.
It makes it easier to deal with actually, because now you've made it illegal for a landlord and tenant to have any relationship. at all, and that would certainly nip
You can
a lot
hand
of this in the
over
bud.
the tenancy agreement to a third party to operate, for instance, an estate agent. Because then the tenancy is between the tenant and the estate agent and nothing to do with you, the owner of the building.
Yes, that could work. Yes, that would work. Yeah. Okay, I'm mindful we're getting close to the top of the hour here. Your final conclusion then, is sex as rent criminal?
It ought to be.
It ought to be. Yeah, I'm now moved. I'm with you now.
Yeah.
I think the same. I think at first I was almost like, well, it's not really anyone's business. If they want to do this, it's up to them.
Mhm.
And if they want to provide sexual favors in exchange for lesser rent, then it's up to them. We're in a free society. But you're right. Have we discussed it today? My view has changed, and I think, I think it should be illegal between a landlord and a tenant, especially if it's private landlord-tenant scenario. And obviously, if there's a third party in between, as you've just alluded to, with a estate agent perhaps that does the negotiating, then that's different. Although you don't want the landlord to turn up at the tenant unannounced, etc. But then the tenant could go to the estate agent and say, "Oi, the landlord is turning up. What's going on?"
No,
So
but
they've
actually
got
you
some
can't, can you? Because the tenant has no relationship with the landlord. A landlord cannot turn up. This is what it's the
Yeah, they can't.
the
Yeah.
tenant doesn't even know who the landlord is. So how do you turn up? Based
Yeah,
on what?
true. Well, your property.
It's not as because any tenant will say, I don't know who you are. My business is with XYZ Limited. I have no idea who you are. Get out. And even the police will come along and say, is the tenancy agreement with you?
That's true.
No.
Yeah, very true.
What are you doing here?
Yes, that's true. Okay, so you found a solution. Well done. I'll applaud you.
Hey. You want one of my other jokes then?
No. Let's keep them to one side. Okay, unfortunately, we have reached the end of the show for another week.
Oh.